I found the folder on a Saturday morning, and for a long moment I simply held it in my hands without opening it. It was an ordinary thing, a cream-colored manila folder with a rubber band around it, the kind you find in the bottom drawer of any home office. But the way my daughter Claire set it down on my kitchen table, gently, carefully, the way you set down something that has already cost you more than anyone knows, told me that what was inside had been carried for a very long time. My name is Margaret Whitfield. I am 76 years old. I live at 64 Bayberry Lane in Annapolis, Maryland, in a small white house with blue shutters and a front porch that catches the afternoon light beautifully in September. I have lived in this house for 31 years. I raised 2 children here. I planted the azaleas myself this spring after my husband Walter died because I needed something living to tend to. I have drunk more cups of coffee at this kitchen table than I could ever count, and I thought I knew every kind of morning this table had seen. I did not know this kind. Before I go any further, I want to say something clearly, the way I wish someone had said it to me years ago. This is a story. It is told as a story because sometimes a story can teach us what a warning label never could. The names belong to this telling, but the feelings, the slow disappearing, the careful documentation, the moment a daughter sits across from her mother and asks to finally be believed, those things are not rare. Many families would recognize them, and that is exactly why I am telling it. Claire is my younger child. She is 34 years old, and she has her father's eyes, that particular shade of gray that looks like rain on the Chesapeake. She was always the quieter of my 2, not shy exactly, but precise. She chose her words carefully. She chose her friends carefully. She chose her work carefully. She became a landscape architect, which suited her completely. She understood how to look at a space and see not only what was there, but what it wanted to become. I always thought that was a gift. I did not realize for a long time that it also made her patient with things that did not deserve patience. She met Andrew Collins when she was 28. He was 33 at the time, a real estate broker with an office on Church Circle and a reputation in Annapolis that I can only describe as polished. He remembered birthdays. He opened doors. He asked questions and then listened, or appeared to listen, with his full attention. He wore pressed shirts on weekends and remembered how I took my coffee, which is black with 1 sugar, and never forgot that detail in 6 years. Small things, courteous things, the kind of things a mother notices and files under the category of, "He is a good man." I believe that filing system completely. I want to pause here for just a moment because I know you are with me, and that means the world to this old woman. Before I go any further into that Saturday morning, would you do me a kindness and tell me where you are listening from? What city, what state, what part of this wide country, and what time is it where you are? Morning coffee, afternoon quiet, the late end of a long day. I read those comments like letters from people I may never meet, but already feel I know. If this story is touching something in you, please leave a like so I know to keep telling these kinds of stories. Subscribe if you want to sit with me again tomorrow, because there is a new one here every single day. Now let me go back to that kitchen table. Claire arrived at 9:30. I remember because I had just finished watering the herbs on the windowsill, the parsley, and the small pot of thyme that I keep alive every winter through sheer stubbornness. She knocked, which surprised me, because Claire has had a key to this house since she was 16, and usually just opens the door and calls my name. But that morning she knocked, and I noticed it without knowing yet what it meant. She was wearing a dark green jacket, and her hair was pulled back. She looked tidy the way a person looks when they have worked very hard to appear tidy. Every detail managed so that no one asks how they are actually doing. I recognized that kind of tidy. I had worn it myself after Walter died. You construct a surface so you do not have to explain what is underneath. She had the folder with her. She set it down before she even sat, and then she sat across from me and put both hands flat on the table, and she said, "Mom, before I tell you anything, I need you to promise me something." I poured her a cup of coffee. I said, "All right." She said, "I need you to not make this comfortable. I need you to not find the explanation that lets everyone off the hook. I need you to just listen." Those words sat between us like something warm and heavy. I did not answer right away because the honest answer required courage I was still gathering. Because she was right. Over the years, when Claire had said things that made me uneasy about Andrew, small things, a comment here, a stiffness there, a reason she could not come to Sunday dinner or stay past 7, I had been the one to smooth it over. He is just particular. He likes things a certain way. That is just how some men are. Marriage takes adjustment. I had been offering explanations like aspirin, something to make the discomfort pass without ever asking where it came from. I said, "I promise." She opened the folder. "I want to tell you what I did not find inside, because I think it matters. There was no photograph of something terrible. There was no letter full of cruelty spelled out in ugly language. There was nothing that would make your stomach turn the way a dramatic scene in a movie might. And I think that is precisely why it had gone on so long, because there was nothing that looked, at first glance, like an emergency. What was inside was quieter and more instructive than any dramatic evidence could be. There were bank statements, joint accounts that she and Andrew had opened 2 years after marrying, accounts that she had not known were overdrawn until a payment she tried to make for her own professional licensing renewal was declined. There were emails, printed and arranged by date, in which Andrew responded to questions about finances with long explanations that circled back to the same conclusion, that Claire was not good with money, that she worried unnecessarily, that he was handling everything, and that her anxiety was the problem, not the accounts. There was a list, written in Claire's own handwriting, of phrases Andrew repeated. "That is not what happened. You always do this. Your mother puts ideas in your head. I am the only one who really knows you. You would not survive without me." And there were receipts, regular charges on a card in her name for services she had not purchased, a storage unit she did not know existed, subscriptions, memberships, a half-dozen small steady withdrawals from her personal account that she could not trace and that Andrew dismissed each time she asked as banking fees, administrative costs, things she did not understand. I looked at all of it, and I felt 2 things at once. The first was a kind of slow grief, not the sudden grief of shock, but the deep, tired grief of understanding something you had been protected from understanding for years. The second was something closer to recognition, because I saw, laid out on my kitchen table in cream-colored folders and printed emails and handwritten lists, something that I had no name for when Claire was living inside it, but that I could name clearly now. This was not a marriage with problems. This was a marriage where one person had been slowly and methodically separated from the things that make a person a person. Her money, her time, her confidence, her sense of what was real. I have spent a great deal of my 76 years believing that the worst things in families are loud. Arguments, betrayals, the kind of events that everyone hears about and agrees are terrible. I have learned, much later than I should have, that the worst things in families are often very quiet. They sound like explanations. They sound like concern. They sound like a husband who remembers how your mother takes her coffee. Let me tell you a little about where I come from, because it matters to how I understood all of this, and how slowly. I grew up in Easton, Maryland, which is about an hour east of Annapolis on the Eastern Shore. My own mother was a practical woman, not cold, but economical with emotion, the way people are when they have learned that feeling too much does not change the bills or the weather. My father worked for the State Department of Transportation for 38 years. We were not wealthy, but we were not afraid, and I think that is its own kind of abundance. I married Walter Whitfield when I was 24. He was a civil engineer, steady and gentle, with a sense of humor that appeared exactly when you needed it, and never at the wrong moment. We were married for 41 years before he died of a heart attack on a Wednesday afternoon in October, and I have missed him every day since in the specific way you miss someone who was genuinely good at being a partner. I say all of this because I want you to understand what I brought to that kitchen table. I brought a life that, for all its difficulties, had been honest. I had never lived inside a marriage where the truth was managed as a resource, rationed out or withheld, depending on what was useful. I did not have a frame for what Claire was describing, not in my own experience, which meant I had repeatedly borrowed Andrew's frame instead. He seemed credible. He was articulate. When Claire expressed frustration about their finances in front of me, he would look at her with something between patience and sorrow and say things like, "We have talked about this, sweetheart," in a tone that implied she was not remembering correctly. And I, without meaning to, had let that tone teach me how to hear her. I want to stop here for a moment, because this is important, and I want to say it carefully. What I am about to share with you is something I wish more families understood, and I am not saying it as an accusation of anyone. I am saying it because I believe, with everything in me, that awareness is the beginning of protection. One of the earliest signs of financial control inside a relationship is not poverty. It is not cruelty that anyone outside the relationship can see. It is the slow and systematic removal of a person's understanding of their own financial life. Claire had a degree. She had a career. She earned a salary. And yet by the time she sat at my table that Saturday, she did not know exactly how much money she and Andrew had, where most of it was, what was owed, or whether anything that was in her name was actually under her control. That process had taken years, and it had happened through explanation, not force. Every time she asked a question, there was an answer. The answer simply made her feel foolish for asking, rather than more informed. That is the mechanism, not a locked door. A rotating series of explanations that leave you more confused than before, combined with the slow suggestion that your confusion is the proof of your inadequacy. I am going to tell you more about Claire's life inside that marriage, and about what I missed and why, and about the moment things shifted. But first, I want you to do something for me. If you are listening to this and you recognize any part of what I have just described, whether in your own life or in the life of someone you love, write the word "listen" in the comments. Just that one word. Because sometimes the first step is knowing you are not the only one who has been inside this kind of quiet. And if this story is giving you something, please share it with someone today. Share it with a daughter, a sister, a neighbor, a friend. You may not know who needs it, but you might. Subscribe if you have not already, because this channel carries a new story every single morning, and some of them arrive at exactly the right moment for exactly the right person. Now let me go back to Claire. I grew up believing that you could tell a lot about a man by how he treated people who could do nothing for him. Waitstaff, parking attendants, the checkout clerk at the grocery store. Andrew passed every one of those informal tests. He was gracious without being performative. He made eye contact. He said please and thank you, and remembered names. He was the kind of man who made other people feel important, and that quality, which is genuinely a quality, also meant that no one who met him socially would believe you if you said something was wrong. Claire understood this. She told me later that she had run through the conversation in her mind dozens of times, the conversation where she told someone outside the marriage what was happening, and every version of it ended the same way. With the other person saying, "But Andrew seems so," and trailing off toward a list of his visible virtues. She had stopped trying to have that conversation before she ever had it, because she had already lost it in her own imagination. That kind of preemptive defeat is something I had no name for then. I have one now. It is called isolation, and it does not always require that a person be physically separated from their community. Sometimes a person can have a full address book and a social calendar and a warm marriage on the surface and still be deeply, precisely isolated, because they have been taught, gradually and thoroughly, that no one on the outside will understand, believe, or receive the truth. I asked Claire, that Saturday morning, when she first knew. She wrapped her hands around her coffee cup and looked at the window for a long moment, the way people do when they are deciding not which memory to share, but which one to begin with. She said, "I think I always knew something. but I told myself it was just how things were. I thought this was what being married meant, that someone else made sense of the big things and I managed the small ones. I said, "How did he make that arrangement feel normal?" She said, "He was generous about it. He never made me feel punished. He made me feel protected. He said I had enough to worry about with the business and the clients and the designs. He said the finances were his contribution, so I could concentrate on mine." She paused. "It sounds reasonable when you say it that way." It does sound reasonable. That is the difficulty. Many of the mechanisms of control, when described in isolation, sound like reasonable expressions of love or practicality or partnership. The unreasonableness is in the pattern, in the accumulation, in what the combination of small reasonable things produces, which is a person who no longer knows their own financial life, who no longer makes independent decisions, who no longer trusts their own reading of a situation, who apologizes when they ask a question. I looked at my daughter across my kitchen table, and I saw something I had been too comfortable to see before. I saw the shape of years of small erosions, the hesitation before she said anything, the way she glanced toward the window even inside my house, the house where she grew up, as if checking to make sure the coast was clear, the careful way she had phrased her first request of me, that I not make this comfortable, that I not reach for the explanation that let everyone off the hook. She had expected me to do that. She had arrived at my door braced for it. That told me something about the conversations we had not been having, and about the ones I had inadvertently closed by being too quick to reassure. The morning light was moving across the kitchen floor, the way it does in late October, low and gold and a little thin. I could smell the thyme from the windowsill. I kept my hands around my cup, and I did not say anything for a little while, because I had learned just barely in time that the most useful thing I could do in that moment was not speak. There is a particular kind of silence that is not emptiness. It is permission. It is the silence that says, "I am here, and I am not going anywhere, and you do not need to hurry or perform or make this easier for me." I had not always offered that silence to Claire. I was offering it now. She told me about the first time she tried to access their joint account online and found the password had been changed. Andrew had explained it as a security update. He had set up a new login for her, one that showed a simplified view of the account without the full transaction history. She had not known for 3 years that the account she could see was not the whole picture. She told me about the conversation she had with a colleague whose name was Diane, a woman she had known professionally for 5 years. Claire had mentioned, carefully and vaguely, that she was having some difficulty understanding the family finances, and Diane had said, in the way that friends sometimes say the thing that cracks a window open, "Honey, if you do not understand your own finances, that is not a personality trait. That is a circumstance, and circumstances can be changed." She told me that she had driven home from that lunch and sat in the car outside the house for 22 minutes before going inside. She had counted the minutes because counting was the only thing she could think to do with her hands that would not require explaining later. I asked her, "What were you thinking in the car?" She said, "I was thinking that I did not know who to be if I left, and that I did not know who I was becoming if I stayed." I have thought about that sentence every day since she said it. I want to tell you something about myself before I go further, because I think it matters, and because I am aware that telling a story like this without telling the whole truth of it would be its own kind of betrayal. I was not an easy mother. I was not cruel, not cold, nothing of that kind. But I was efficient, and I was certain, and in my certainty, I sometimes left very little room for anything that did not fit neatly into the categories I had already established. Walter used to say, gently and with love, that I filed people too quickly. He meant that I decided what someone was like and then found evidence for my decision rather than the other way around. He was right. And nowhere was that tendency more present than in the way I had categorized Andrew Collins. Polished, dependable, a good provider, a man who remembered how I took my coffee. I had filed him as safe before Claire was 2 years into the marriage, and after that, when small things surfaced, things that might have asked me to open the file again and reconsider, I smoothed them back down, Not because I did not care about Claire, because I was attached to my assessment, because it was comfortable, because changing my mind about Andrew would have required admitting that my first assessment had been inadequate, and at 70-something, nobody loves discovering their judgment has gaps. I am telling you this not to punish myself, because I do not think punishment serves anyone here, but because I believe that honest accounting is the only thing that produces genuine change. I had a role in the length of Claire's silence, not the causing of it, but the allowing of it. There is a difference, but both matter. Walter died 14 years ago, and his death taught me some things I am still learning. The first is that people show you who they are in the way they carry loss. Andrew was very attentive at Walter's funeral. He made sure I had water. He spoke beautifully to the pastor. He held Claire's hand through the service in a way that looked, from the outside, like exactly what tenderness looks like. I have since understood that performance and care are not always the same thing, and that distinguishing between them requires more time and more attention than a funeral allows. After Walter died, I became, without fully intending to, more emotionally dependent on the image of Claire's marriage than I had been before. I needed her to be okay. I needed the marriage to be solid. I needed Andrew to be the good man I had decided he was, because Walter was gone, and I was 62, and the world had become suddenly less steady, and a daughter with a good marriage was one of the few fixed points I was holding on to. I am not proud of that. But it is true. Would you pause with me here for just a moment? Because I want to make sure you are still with me, and I want to ask you something real. Have you ever held on to a belief about someone you loved, or someone your child loved, because the alternative felt like more than you could carry? If the answer is yes, will you tell me in the comments where you are listening from tonight? What state, what city, what time it is there? I want to know where this story is landing. And if it is giving you something, leave a like, share it with someone who might need the reminder that paying attention is not meddling, it is love. Subscribe if you have not already, because every morning there is a new story here, and I am always grateful for the company. Now let me continue. Claire had tried to talk to me twice before that Saturday. I know this now. I did not know it then, because both times I had answered in a way that closed the conversation before it opened. The first time was 3 years earlier, at Thanksgiving, when Claire mentioned while helping me wash dishes that she and Andrew had had a disagreement about money and that she was feeling uncertain about their financial arrangement. I said, all couples go through that. Walter and I had our disagreements too. Andrew is steady, Claire. You chose a steady man. She nodded and changed the subject, and I thought we had resolved something. We had not resolved anything. I had simply made it clear that I was not a safe place for that particular truth. The second time was 18 months before the Saturday morning with the folder, when she called me on a Tuesday evening and said she had been thinking about what financial independence looked like for married women, and asked if I thought there was a way to maintain your own accounts while being married without it meaning distrust. I said, honey, if you trust him, you trust him. Joint accounts are just practical. She said, right, okay, yes. And then she said she had to go, and we talked about the azaleas for another 10 minutes and hung up. I have replayed both of those conversations more times than I can count since that Saturday in October. I hear myself now in both of them, not as a villainous mother, but as a well-meaning one who had been made incapable of receiving certain truths by the very comfort I had built around my assessments. I was not listening for what Claire was actually saying. I was listening for confirmation that things were fine, and when she gave me the slightest opening to take that confirmation, I took it. That is the thing about silence. It is not always refusal. Sometimes it is accommodation. Sometimes the person who has stopped trying to tell you something has done so not because they no longer need to be heard, but because they have received enough signals, soft signals, kind signals even, that the listening will not be the kind they need. Claire's colleague Diane, the woman who had said that not understanding your finances is a circumstance and not a personality trait, became an important figure in the months between that Tuesday phone call and the Saturday with the folder. Diane was not a counselor or an attorney. She was simply a woman who had paid attention without an agenda. She had not offered solutions. She had offered a frame. And sometimes a frame is all someone needs to begin seeing their situation differently. I asked Claire, that Saturday, what she had done after the conversation with Diane. She said she had gone home and done something she had not done in years. She had sat down at the kitchen table with a piece of paper and written down every financial question she had about their life together. Not accusations, just questions. How much is in the joint account? What is owed on the house? What are our monthly expenses? What does the insurance cover? What is my name on? What is his name on? What would I need to know if I needed to know everything on my own? She filled 2 pages, and she could not answer a single question from memory. That, she told me, was when she understood that what she had been calling uncertainty or confusion or a tendency to not be good with numbers was not a personality trait. It was a carefully managed state. She had been kept in that state gently, consistently, with explanations and reassurances and the progressive narrowing of her access to the information that would have allowed her to know her own life. Let me tell you what financial control looks like in practice, because I think naming it specifically is one of the most useful things this kind of story can do. It does not always begin with cruelty. Sometimes it begins with generosity, with a partner who says, "You focus on what you are good at, I will handle the rest." The money, the accounts, the bills, the taxes, the insurance, the investments. This can feel like relief, particularly early in a marriage, particularly if one partner is more financially confident than the other. It feels like a division of labor. It feels like love. But over time, that arrangement, if it is built on genuine partnership, evolves. Both people remain informed. Both people know what is owned, what is owed, what is coming in, what is going out. Questions are welcomed because the goal is mutual understanding. When it is not genuine partnership, the arrangement evolves differently. Questions are met with answers that feel like corrections. Concerns are reframed as anxiety. Curiosity is interpreted as suspicion. The partner who has been removed from financial decision-making gradually comes to believe that their removal is a reflection of their inadequacy rather than a deliberate condition imposed by another person. Claire had come to believe, genuinely believed by the time she sat at my table, that she was not good with money. This belief had been reinforced so consistently, through tone, through explanation, through the patient sighing that accompanied her questions, that she had never thought to question whether the belief itself had been manufactured. That is perhaps the most sophisticated aspect of what I have come to understand as a controlling dynamic. It does not require force because it shapes the interior. It does not require a locked door because it builds the walls inside the person. By the time someone believes they are incapable of managing their own finances, they do not try. They do not ask. They accept the arrangement not because they have no choice, but because they no longer believe they would know what to do with a choice. I looked at the folder on my kitchen table, and I understood that Claire had not come to me with a crisis. She had come to me with clarity, and clarity, after years of managed confusion, is its own kind of emergency. I want to stop here for just a moment because I know you are with me, and I am grateful. This is a heavy piece of story, even told quietly. If you are still here, will you tell me where you are listening from, what city or state, and whether it is morning or evening where you are? If someone in your life is living inside financial confusion that feels like it belongs to them, like it is simply their limitation, will you share this story with them? Sometimes hearing the pattern described is the beginning of recognizing it. Leave a like if this is giving you something real, and subscribe because I am here every morning with another story that carries a lesson. Now let me tell you what happened next. I poured Claire more coffee, and I asked her what she needed from me. Not what she wanted me to do, not what I thought the solution was. What she needed from me, in that room, at that table, on that particular morning. She thought about it for a moment, and then she said, "I need you to believe me before you understand me. I know that is not how you usually work, Mom, but I need you to believe the experience before you explain it." That sentence changed something in me. I have always, as I said, been a person who likes to understand before she commits, who needs the logic to line up before she can believe the conclusion. Claire was asking me to do the opposite, to let her experience be real before I had fitted into any framework, to trust what she was living before I knew what name to give it. I said, "Tell me." She told me. She told me that for the first 4 years of the marriage, she had genuinely trusted the arrangement. She told me that Andrew was not always what she would call unkind, that there were good seasons, warm ones, seasons she did not want to erase or deny because she was not trying to construct a story in which nothing had ever been real. She was trying to tell me the truth about something that was complex. She told me that the shift she could point to, the moment the arrangement began to feel less like partnership and more like management, was when she received a letter from her bank informing her that an account she had not known about had been opened in her name. She had asked Andrew about it, and he had said it was for tax purposes, a vehicle their accountant had recommended, and that she did not need to worry about it because he was handling it. When she asked which accountant, he named someone she had never met, someone she could find no record of when she later searched. She told me she had put that question away, filed it, as I said, under things that probably have an explanation. But the question had stayed with her, quietly, in the way that things you file but do not resolve have a way of staying. She told me about the afternoon she came home unexpectedly early from a client site visit and found Andrew on the phone in a way that he explained away, but that she had noticed, each small, explained-away detail adding to the folder she was building in her mind long before she had a physical one. She told me about the Christmas 2 years ago when she had purchased a gift for my neighbor Dorothy using her personal card, and the charge had declined, and she had stood at the register feeling humiliated and confused because she had no understanding of why her card would not work when she believed she had enough money in the account to cover a $40 gift. She had not told me about that moment until now. She had borrowed cash from Dorothy to cover it and told her the card reader must have been having trouble. And then she had gone home and asked Andrew, and he had sighed and said the account had needed a brief adjustment and that he had meant to tell her, and that he would transfer funds immediately. And he had, and the conversation had ended with her apologizing for bothering him when he had so much on his plate. She had apologized for asking about her own money. I sat with that for a long moment. I have a neighbor on Bayberry Lane, a woman named Ruth, who is 80 years old and has lived alone since her husband passed in 2011. Ruth is sharp and funny, and she has a habit of saying things that sound casual and turn out to be the truest things you have heard all week. I had mentioned to Ruth sometime in the previous year that I thought Claire seemed tired. Not sick, not unhappy exactly, just worn at the edges in a way I could not quite locate. Ruth had said, "Sometimes tired is not about rest. Sometimes tired is what happens when a person is working very hard to be someone else's version of okay." I had written that down in the small notebook I keep by my kitchen telephone because it seemed important. I understood it differently now. Let me tell you about Andrew's public reputation, because it is relevant to everything that comes next and everything that had made Claire's silence feel so impossible to break. Andrew Collins was, in the community of Annapolis that both he and Claire moved through, a known and liked figure. His real estate practice was successful. He served on the board of a local charity that provided housing support to families in transition. He was frequently at neighborhood events, school fundraisers when they were relevant to clients or connections, community meetings. He was the kind of presence that a town like Annapolis recognizes as civic, as contributing, as belonging. This is not incidental. Reputation is not merely a social detail in a story like this. Reputation is a structural element. It is part of what made the inside of the marriage invisible from the outside. Every person who knew Andrew, who saw him operate in the world with grace and generosity, was a person who would need significant convincing to update their understanding of him. And Claire had known this. She had mapped it, the way she mapped landscapes professionally, understood the terrain before she walked into it. She had been mapping her escape the way a person maps difficult ground, slowly, carefully, accounting for every obstacle, making sure the path was solid before she put her weight on it. The folder was part of that mapping. It was months of patient documentation. Receipts, printed statements, emails, a written record of conversations including dates and what had been said and how she had felt afterward. She had kept a small notebook, not unlike mine, in her car. The notebook lived in the pocket of the passenger seat, where Andrew would not look because he always drove. That detail, the notebook in the passenger seat pocket, stayed with me for days after she told me. Because it was the kind of adaptation that you only develop inside a long, careful reckoning. The kind that says, I know this space well enough to know where the overlooked corners are. Claire was not a woman in crisis. She was a woman in the middle of a deliberate, methodical recovery of her own life. She had come to me not to be rescued, but to be a witness to her clarity. And it was the most important thing I had ever been asked to do as her mother. Tomorrow, in the next part of this story, I will tell you what we did with that folder, and what I learned about listening before acting, and about the difference between protecting someone and deciding for them. But before I go, I want to sit with you for one more moment. If you have stayed with me this far, I want you to know that I see you. Whatever you came to this story carrying, whatever it is in your own life or the life of someone you love that made you press play, I am grateful you are here. Leave a like if this story is doing something for you. Write the word "listen" in the comments if any part of what I described today felt familiar. Subscribe because there is another story here every single morning, and some of them arrive at exactly the right moment. Tell me where you are watching from. Tell me what time it is. I am always here, and I am always listening. The way I should have listened to Claire years sooner. The way I am learning, even now, to do better. That Saturday morning did not become dramatic all at once. I think that is important to say because when people imagine the moment a family finally understands what has been happening, they imagine shouting. They imagine doors slamming, phones ringing, someone standing up too quickly, some declaration that splits the day in two. But the truth is quieter than that. The truth, at least in my kitchen, was coffee cooling in 2 cups while my daughter and I sat across from each other with a folder between us, both of us understanding that something irreversible had already begun. Not something loud, not something theatrical. Something irreversible in the way dawn is irreversible once the first pale light reaches the edge of the room. Claire had not come asking me to confront Andrew. She had not come asking me to call a lawyer, though she had already spoken to one. She had not come asking me to march into her life and rearrange it with the authority of a mother who had decided she was needed. She came asking for something harder. She came asking me to witness. There is a difference between being helpful and being a witness, and I did not understand that difference until that morning. Being helpful often allows us to feel useful quickly. We can make a phone call, offer a spare room, write a check, express outrage, create motion. But witnessing requires us to stay still long enough to let another person's reality exist without rushing to improve it, soften it, solve it, or make it easier for ourselves to bear. Claire needed me to see the whole shape of what had happened before I tried to touch any piece of it. So I sat there. I kept my hands wrapped around my coffee cup. I let the folder remain open. I looked at the pages one by one when she handed them to me, and when I had questions, I asked them carefully, not the way one asks questions to find holes, but the way one asks questions to build a bridge. When did this charge begin? Do you know where this account is connected? Did he answer this email in person afterward? How did you feel after that conversation? That last question mattered more than I expected, because Claire could recall facts, dates, amounts, names of institutions, the last 4 digits of cards, password changes, missed payments. She had become, over months, the archivist of her own vanishing. But when I asked how she had felt, she looked startled, as if no one had asked her that in a very long time. She said, mostly embarrassed. Not afraid first, not angry first, embarrassed. I want you to hear that, because I have come to believe that embarrassment is one of the strongest cages in the world. People will endure extraordinary suffering rather than admit they have been confused, manipulated, misled, or made small by someone they once defended. Shame is a lock that does not need a key from the outside. It teaches the person inside to hold the door shut themselves. Claire said, I kept thinking, how could I explain this to anyone without sounding foolish? I have a degree. I run projects. I negotiate contracts. I can read grading plans and municipal requirements and stormwater regulations. I can look at a piece of land and understand drainage patterns better than most people can understand a grocery list. And yet I could not explain my own checking account. She laughed once when she said it, but it was not a laugh with humor in it. It was the kind of sound people make when the truth has sharp edges. I said, that does not make you foolish. She looked at me then, directly, and I saw how much she wanted to believe me. I said it again, slower. That does not make you foolish. It means someone had an interest in keeping you uninformed. She closed her eyes. Sometimes a sentence is not new information. Sometimes it is permission to stop arguing with yourself. If you are listening right now, and some part of this is landing in a place you do not usually let anyone see, I want you to pause with me. Put in the comments the word clarity, just that one word if you cannot say anything else, and tell me where you are listening from, because I want this story to become a map of all the places where people are waking up to the truth that confusion is sometimes created, not inherited. Leave a like if you believe stories like this need to be told. Subscribe if you want to sit with me again tomorrow morning. Now let me continue, because what happened next taught me something I will carry for the rest of my life. Claire reached into the folder and removed a smaller envelope, pale blue, sealed once, and then opened carefully with a letter opener. She placed it on the table, but did not hand it to me. This is the part I almost did not bring, she said. I waited. It is from the bank, not the main one. A different one. The envelope contained a notice regarding a line of credit opened in Claire's name. I will not pretend here to understand every financial mechanism involved, because there were details even Claire was still untangling with professional help. But the essential fact was plain enough. Her name had been used in ways she had not knowingly authorized. Her credit had become another room in a house she was not allowed to enter. There is a particular anger that rises in a mother when she sees her child's name treated as an object. Not her body, not even her heart, but her name, her legal identity. The signature that says, I am this person and I consent. A name is not a small thing. A name is a door into a life. And someone had been walking through Claire's doors while convincing her she was too anxious to ask why they were open. I felt heat move up my neck. Claire saw it immediately. Mom, she said, please do not go there yet. Go where? To anger, not yet. That stopped me. Because anger, when it arrives in defense of someone we love, can feel righteous. It can feel like proof that we care, proof that we finally understand, proof that we are not the person who minimized the signs before. But Claire was asking me to understand that my anger, even if justified, could become another force she had to manage. That was the first time I realized how exhausting it must be to disclose something painful to someone who loves you. Not because love is bad, but because love reacts. Love gasps. Love interrupts. Love promises things it has not thought through. Love turns the person telling the story into the caretaker of the person hearing it. Claire did not have room to take care of my reaction. So I breathed. I looked at the envelope. I placed both hands flat on the table the way she had earlier. All right, I said. Not yet. She nodded. And then she told me about the attorney. Her name was Marisol Vega. Claire had found her through Diane, who had known someone who knew someone, which is how women have survived certain kinds of private emergencies for centuries, through quiet chains of practical mercy. Marisol specialized in family law and financial abuse cases, though Claire said the phrase financial abuse still made her feel strange when applied to her own life. Why strange? I asked. Because abuse sounds like something that should have looked more obvious, she said. It sounds like something I should have recognized sooner. There it was again. The old belief that pain must announce itself in the expected costume before we are allowed to name it. I told her, some things are designed not to be recognized while they are happening. She looked down at the papers. Marisol said something like that. What did she say? She said control is often most successful when it resembles competence. I wrote that down later. Control is often most successful when it resembles competence. I have turned that sentence over in my mind so many times that it has become almost a prayer. Because Andrew had been competent. That was one of the most confusing pieces. He really did know how to handle money, accounts, documents, presentations, public trust. He was not chaotic. He was not careless. He was organized, and his organization had become a weapon so polished that people mistook it for stability. Claire had met with Marisol 3 times before coming to me. The first meeting, she said, she mostly cried and apologized for crying. The second meeting, she brought documents. The third meeting, Marisol helped her separate what they knew from what they suspected and what needed professional investigation. That distinction became important. What we know, what we suspect, what we need to verify. I think families often get lost because they treat all 3 as the same thing. We either dismiss suspicions because they are not yet proven, or we treat every fear as fact because the emotional truth is so strong. But Claire was learning, carefully and painfully, to build a structure sturdy enough to hold up under pressure. She was not interested in revenge. She was interested in reality. Marisol said I should not confront him until I have copies of everything I can access safely, Claire said, and she said I should not tell him I have spoken to her. I nodded, though some old instinct in me wanted to say, surely you can talk to your husband. Surely a conversation can clarify. Surely there is still a reasonable explanation somewhere. But I had promised not to make this comfortable, so I did not say surely. I have learned that surely can be a dangerous word. It pretends to be confidence, but often it is only denial wearing good shoes. Instead, I asked, what does safely mean in this situation? Claire seemed relieved by the question. It means from devices he does not have access to. It means not using our shared printer. It means not forwarding documents to my normal email. It means keeping copies somewhere outside the house. It means not changing my behavior so much that he notices. She said all of this calmly, but the calm was devastating. Because that is the moment I understood that my daughter's life had become tactical. Not dramatic. Tactical. The difference matters. People who have never lived under control often ask why someone did not simply leave, simply confront, simply ask, simply refuse. They do not understand that by the time leaving becomes necessary, even ordinary actions have to be considered for consequence. Printing a statement is not just printing a statement. Asking a question is not just asking a question. Putting a folder in your car is not just putting a folder in your car. Every action becomes part of a larger terrain. Claire, my quiet daughter, who designed gardens and public courtyards and restorative green spaces, had been designing an exit route through her own marriage. I want to stop here because I can feel how heavy this is, and I know some of you are listening while making dinner, or folding laundry, or sitting in your car before going inside. If this story is speaking to something you have seen, please write the word witness in the comments. Not rescue, not judge, witness. And if you know someone who always seems confused after talking to their partner, someone who apologizes for asking basic questions, send this to them gently. Leave a like so this story reaches more people, and subscribe if you believe stories can carry truth where lectures cannot. After Claire explained the attorney's guidance, she told me what she needed next. I need to keep some things here, she said. Of course. Not everything. Copies, a backup drive, some paper documents, the notebook from my car eventually, but not yet. Where do you want me to put them? She looked around the kitchen as if seeing the house not as the place where she had grown up, but as a possible archive. Somewhere, He would never look. I almost said, "Andrew does not come here without you," but I stopped myself. That was the kind of statement that used old reality to argue against new caution. Instead, I thought, my house is small, but every old house has its secrets. Places used by habit and places forgotten by habit. The linen closet with the false back Walter built when we renovated the upstairs bathroom. The metal recipe box in the pantry that still held index cards in my mother's handwriting. The cedar chest at the foot of my bed filled with quilts. The crawl space under the stairs where Christmas ornaments slept in boxes labeled by year. But the place I chose was Walter's workshop. It was not a grand workshop, just a narrow room off the back of the garage where he had kept tools, jars of screws, old paint cans, and pieces of wood he insisted might be useful someday. After he died, I cleaned most of the house within the first year, but not that room. The workshop remained almost exactly as he left it, not because I could not bear to change it, though that was partly true, but because it had become a quiet conversation between my past and my present. I would go in there sometimes to find a screwdriver and end up standing with my hand on the workbench, remembering the sound of him humming while he fixed something that probably did not need fixing. Andrew had never set foot in that workshop. Not once. He had no reason to. It smelled of sawdust and old varnish and Walter. I took Claire there. The garage was chilly. October had begun to move into the bones of the house. The workshop light flickered twice before staying on, and for a moment both of us stood in that narrow room with its pegboard wall and dusty jars and the wooden stool Walter used to sit on. Claire ran her fingers over the edge of the workbench. "I remember Dad letting me paint birdhouses in here," she said. "You painted them purple." "I thought birds liked purple." "Maybe they did." She smiled, and for 1 second I saw her at 8 years old, serious and focused, holding a paintbrush too large for her hand. Then the smile disappeared, not sharply but slowly, like light moving behind a cloud. I opened the lower cabinet beneath the workbench. Inside were old coffee cans of nails, a folded tarp, and a wooden box Walter had built for drill bits. Behind the box was a space nearly invisible unless you knew to reach past the back support. Walter had once used it to hide my Christmas present, a silver bracelet I still wear on Sundays. "This is good," Claire said. Her voice changed when she said it. There was relief in it, but also grief. Because needing a hiding place in your mother's garage is not the kind of milestone anyone imagines for their adult daughter. She placed a small flash drive into a plain envelope and wrote nothing on it. Then she gave me several copies of documents, each in a separate folder. We did not label them with anything obvious. We put them inside an old manual for a table saw Walter had sold in 2008. I remember that detail because the manual had a grease stain on the corner and an illustration of a blade guard on the front. It was absurdly ordinary. Perhaps that is why it felt safe. When we closed the cabinet, Claire put one hand on it and stood very still. I said, "What is it?" She said, "I keep thinking I should feel braver." "Oh, sweetheart." "I do not feel brave. I feel sneaky. I feel disloyal. I feel like I am doing something wrong. That is another thing I want people to understand. Control rearranges morality. It can make privacy feel like betrayal. It can make self-protection feel like deceit. It can make asking for help feel like an act of aggression against the person harming you. I told her, "You are not betraying a marriage by trying to understand your own life." She looked at me. I said, "And you are not disloyal for refusing to disappear." She cried then, not loudly. Claire rarely cried loudly. Her face folded inward first, as if she were trying to contain the feeling before it reached the air. Then she covered her mouth with one hand, and I stepped toward her but did not pull her into my arms until she nodded. That, too, I had to learn. Not every hurting person wants to be grabbed by comfort. Sometimes even comfort needs permission. I held my daughter in her father's workshop while the October wind moved against the garage door, and I thought about Walter. I thought about what he would have done, what he would have said, how carefully he would have set his jaw if he had been standing there with us. Walter was a gentle man, but gentleness was not weakness in him. It was discipline. It was strength that had decided not to make itself frightening unless absolutely necessary. I wished for him then with such force that it almost took my breath. Not because I needed him to solve it, because I wanted Claire to feel, even for a moment, the kind of fatherly steadiness that had once filled that room. After a while, she stepped back and wiped her face. "I have to go home by noon," she said. The word home did something painful in the air. I almost said, "You do not have to call it that." But of course she did. For the moment, it was still where she lived. It was where her clothes were, where her work files were, where her life had been arranged. We must not rush people linguistically into realities they have not yet been able to leave physically. So I said, "All right." We went back to the kitchen. She checked her phone, not casually, but with the focused quickness of someone reviewing weather before crossing water. "Has he called?" "No." "Texted." "What did he say?" She hesitated, then turned the phone toward me. Andrew had written, "Hope your mom is doing okay. Remember we have the Henderson dinner tonight. Please do not let this become one of those long, emotional afternoons. You know how exhausted you get after." There are sentences that appear gentle until you notice the leash inside them. Hope your mom is doing okay. A kindness. Remember we have dinner. A reminder. Please do not let this become one of those long emotional afternoons. A boundary disguised as concern. You know how exhausted you get after. A diagnosis. I handed the phone back carefully. "What will you answer?" Claire typed, "She is fine. I will be home soon." She showed it to me before sending, not because she needed my permission, but because the habit of having another person review her responses had entered her body. I hated Andrew for that, in a way I did not yet allow myself to express. "That is enough," I said. She sent it. Then she sat down again and looked at the folder. "There is something else." I had already learned not to brace visibly. "What is it?" "I think he knows I am asking questions." "Why?" "He has been nicer." That sentence may sound strange to someone who has not lived near this kind of thing. But Claire said it with absolute seriousness, and I understood immediately that niceness, in this context, was not comfort. It was weather, a shift in pressure. She told me Andrew had started bringing flowers again, the way he had early in their marriage. He had suggested a weekend trip. He had told her she seemed stressed and that he wanted them to reconnect. He had touched her shoulder more often in public. He had sent affectionate texts during the workday. None of these things, individually, were wrong. Some of them might have been lovely in another marriage. But in this one, arriving exactly as Claire began asking questions and gathering documents, they felt strategic. "Maybe he senses distance," she said. "Maybe he does not know why. Or maybe he knows more than you think." She nodded. Marisol said not to assume he knows nothing, but also not to assume he knows everything. What we know, what we suspect, what we need to verify, that framework again. I found myself clinging to it like a railing. Before Claire left, we made a plan for communication. Not a dramatic plan. Not code words from a spy novel, though part of it felt uncomfortably close to that. If she needed to come over unexpectedly, she would say she was bringing me soup. If she wanted me to call her and create a reason for her to leave a room, she would text me a picture of my azaleas, any picture, even one from years earlier. If she sent a blank message, I would call Diane, not Andrew. If she did not respond to me for more than 24 hours after sending something concerning, I would contact Marisol's office. It felt both excessive and not nearly enough. I wrote the instructions in my notebook, but not clearly. I wrote them as if they were gardening notes. Soup means visit. Azaleas means call. Blank means Diane. 24 means M. There are moments when you realize ordinary objects have become part of a safety system. A notebook, a flower photo, a bowl of soup, a mother's phone. Claire watched me write. "I am sorry," she said. I looked up sharply. "For what?" for bringing this here." I put the pen down. "Claire." She looked at me, and there was a child's fear in her adult face. I said, "You are not bringing trouble into my house. You are bringing truth into my house. There is a difference." She looked away. I said, "And this house can hold truth." That was not a sentence I had planned. It rose from somewhere below thought. But once I said it, I knew it was the truest thing I could offer. My house had held birth announcements, homework, Walter's illness, casseroles after funerals, teenage heartbreak, Christmas mornings, unpaid bills, laughter, loneliness, and the long, strange quiet of widowhood. It could hold this too. Every home, if it is worthy of the name, must be able to hold the truth of the people it claims to love. Before she left, Claire asked to use the bathroom. While she was upstairs, I stood by the kitchen sink and looked out at the backyard. The maple tree had begun losing leaves, one at a time, without drama. They fell in the slow, resigned way leaves do, not as failure, but as season. I thought about all the seasons I had misread in my daughter. I had thought she was busy when she was isolated. I had thought she was tired when she was being managed. I had thought she was private when she was ashamed. I had thought Andrew was attentive when he was observant in the way a lock is observant of a key. When Claire came downstairs, she had smoothed her hair again. The tidy surface had returned. At the door, I wanted to say everything. I wanted to say, "Do not go back." I wanted to say, "Stay here." I wanted to say, "I will call him myself." I wanted to say, "Your father would never have allowed this," which would have been unfair and unhelpful and not entirely true, because Walter, like me, might have had to learn what he was seeing. Instead, I said, "Drive carefully." She understood what I was not saying. "I will text you when I get there." "Good." She opened the door, then turned back. "Mom?" "Yes?" "Thank you for not asking me why I stayed." I felt something inside me break and arrange itself differently. "I should have known not to ask that years ago," I said. She shook her head. "We are here now. We are here now." That became another sentence I carried. After she left, I watched from the porch as her car pulled away from Bayberry Lane. I stood there until the street was empty. Then I went back inside, locked the door, and walked straight to Walter's workshop. I opened the lower cabinet beneath the workbench, touched the table saw manual with the grease stain, and closed the door again. It was real. The documents were real. The story was real. My daughter's clarity was real. And now I knew. I want to pause here, because this is where I need you to stay close with me. If you have ever been trusted with someone's truth, write the word "hold" in the comments. Because that is what we are asked to do sometimes. Not fix immediately, not explain. Hold. Leave a like if this part of the story is making you think about the people in your life differently. Subscribe if you are walking through this story with me, because there is more to tell, and tomorrow's piece will go deeper into what it means to protect someone without taking their voice away. That afternoon, after Claire texted that she had arrived home, I did something that may sound small, but was not small to me. I made a list of what I had missed. I did not make it to torture myself. I made it because my mind, left alone, would try to blur the edges. It would try to make my mistakes more comfortable. It would say, "You could not have known." It would say, "He fooled everyone." It would say, "You are old, you are widowed, you did your best." Some of that may have been true, but none of it was sufficient. So I wrote the list. Thanksgiving dishes, Tuesday phone call, declined Christmas card story never told, leaving Sunday dinner early. Andrew answering for her, Claire apologizing too much, the way she checked her phone, the way she stopped bringing up work frustrations, the way she laughed less, the way I accepted less. That last line hurt most, the way I accepted less. Because that is what happened. Without knowing it, I had accepted a smaller version of my daughter because the smaller version caused less concern. She visited but did not linger. She smiled but did not elaborate. She said work was busy. She said marriage was fine. She said Andrew was Andrew, with a tone I should have heard more carefully, and I accepted it because it allowed me to continue believing the story I preferred. Later that evening, Ruth came by with a container of chicken stew. Ruth has always had a sixth sense for emotional weather. She said she had made too much, which was her usual lie when she wanted to check on me without saying she was checking on me. She stood in my doorway wearing a red cardigan and holding the stew in both hands. "You look like you have seen a ghost," she said. "I may have. Living or dead?" "Living." She nodded as if that made perfect sense. I let her in. Now, I did not tell Ruth everything. Claire's story was not mine to distribute. That is another thing I had to learn quickly. Being trusted with the truth does not make you the owner of it. It makes you responsible for your handling of it. But I told Ruth enough. I said Claire was facing something difficult in her marriage, something involving control and money, and that I had missed more than I wanted to admit. Ruth listened from the chair near the window, her hands folded over the knob of her cane. When I finished, she said, "Believing late is better than defending wrong forever." I closed my eyes. "That is a Ruth sentence," I said. "It is a true one. I should have seen it. Maybe, maybe not. Seeing is not only about eyes. Sometimes it is about what a person can afford to know." That irritated me at first. I could afford to know my daughter was hurting. Ruth did not flinch. "Could you, right after Walter, when you had built half your steadiness on believing she was safe?" I wanted to argue, but the truth of it sat between us. Ruth continued, "That does not excuse it. It explains the lock." The lock. There were so many locks in this story. Locks on accounts, locks on phones, locks made of reputation, locks made of shame, locks made of a mother's need to believe things were all right. "And what do I do now?" I asked. Ruth leaned back. "You become very careful. Not quiet, careful. There is a difference." I asked what she meant. "Quiet can be fear. Careful can be love with discipline." I wrote that down too. Love with discipline. That night, I barely slept. I kept imagining Claire in her house with Andrew, moving through rooms I had visited many times. Their house was a handsome brick colonial near the water, not on the water exactly, but close enough to smell salt in the air on damp mornings. I had always liked that house. It had built-in shelves and a blue front door and hydrangeas Claire had planted herself. Now, in my mind, every room looked different. The kitchen island where Andrew had once carved Thanksgiving turkey became a place where conversations could be controlled. The office upstairs became a place where passwords lived. The primary bedroom became not a sanctuary, but a stage. I wondered what Claire was doing at that exact moment. Sitting beside him on the sofa? Laughing at the right places during a television show? Getting ready for the Henderson dinner he had reminded her about? Wearing earrings he liked? Checking her own face in the mirror to make sure nothing inside showed outside? At 76, I have learned that imagination can be cruel when it has too much room. So I got up at 2 a.m, made tea, and sat at the kitchen table. The folder was not there anymore. The table looked ordinary again. That was almost worse. How dare a table return to ordinary after holding what it had held? I opened my notebook and wrote one sentence. Believe the experience before you explain it. Then I wrote another. Do not make her manage your fear. And then, because I am still myself, I made another list. What I could do? Listen. Store documents. Follow her plan. Ask before acting. Learn. Keep my phone charged. Be available. Tell the truth when invited. What I could not do, confront him without her consent, decide her timeline, make her leave before she was ready, use my guilt as a reason to take over, confuse my urgency with her safety. That list became my own little constitution. I returned to it often. The next morning was Sunday. I went to church, though I remember almost nothing about the sermon. I remember the stained glass throwing blue and red light across the pew in front of me. I remember singing the first hymn without hearing my own voice. I remember seeing Andrew Collins 2 rows ahead of me. I had forgotten he sometimes came to my church when his own schedule allowed. Claire was not with him. He stood beside an older couple I recognized from a charity board, smiling, shaking hands, being Andrew. His navy suit fit perfectly. His hair was neatly combed. He turned at one point, saw me, and smiled with such convincing warmth that for one awful second my body responded before my mind did. I almost smiled back the way I always had. Habit is powerful. Then I remembered the envelope, the line of credit, the text message, Claire saying, "Please do not go to anger yet." So I gave him a small nod and nothing more. He noticed. Of course he noticed. That was the thing about Andrew. He noticed changes in temperature. After the service, he approached me near the vestibule. "Margaret," he said, "how are you feeling? Claire said you seemed a little tired yesterday." A little tired. So that was the story. Not that Claire had visited her mother, not that we had spent a morning together, that I had been tired, that Claire had been attending to me. Already he had placed an interpretation over the event, soft as a cloth, ready for public use. I said, "I am well, thank you." His smile did not move, but his eyes did. "Good. She worries about you. She has a good heart." "She does." He paused. "Sometimes too good. She takes on everyone else's emotions. I try to remind her she does not have to carry everything." There it was, the gentle framing. Claire as emotionally porous, Claire as burdened by others, Claire as someone whose perceptions could be attributed to feeling too much. A year earlier, I might have agreed. That morning I heard the machinery. I said, "Claire has always been strong." He tilted his head, still smiling. Of course. Only 2 words, but the tone did work. It made my statement sound sentimental, maternal, slightly naive. Of course. As if strength were not in question, only judgment. I felt, in that instant, how easily he could make a person feel subtly corrected without ever appearing rude, and I understood my daughter better. I looked at him, this man I had welcomed to my table, this man who had brought flowers after Walter died, this man whose public kindness had been real enough to deceive nearly everyone, and I felt the anger rise again. But this time, I did not let it drive. Love with discipline. I said, "It was good to see you, Andrew." "Likewise." I walked away first. My hands were shaking when I reached the car. Not from fear exactly, from the shock of recognizing a language after years of thinking it was music. If you have ever had that moment when a person's tone suddenly reveals itself and you wonder how you missed it for so long, write the word "noticed" in the comments. I mean it. There is power in naming the moment you noticed. Like this video if you are still here with me. Share it with someone who has been doubting their own reading of a situation. And subscribe, because this story is not finished, and sometimes the most important turns happen after the first truth is finally spoken. When I got home from church, there was a message from Claire. Just 3 words. Dinner was fine. I stared at it for a long time because fine had become one of those words I no longer trusted. Fine can mean safe. Fine can mean endured. Fine can mean I am not ready to tell you more. Fine can mean please do not ask yet. So I wrote back, "I love you." No question mark. That mattered too. I was learning not to make every message a request. She replied with a heart. For the next 2 weeks, we lived in a strange new pattern. Outwardly, almost nothing changed. Claire worked. Andrew attended meetings and showed properties and appeared in photographs on social media, standing beside smiling clients in front of sold homes. I watered my herbs, went to the grocery store, spoke with Ruth, and attended church. The world continued performing normalcy with breathtaking confidence. But beneath that surface, Claire's recovery of information continued. She opened a separate email account on a device Andrew had never used. She obtained a copy of her credit report. She met once more with Marisol. Diane helped her scan additional documents from the office after hours. Claire began writing down conversations immediately after they happened. Not only what Andrew said, but the sequence, the tone, the way the topic changed when she asked for specifics. She sent me nothing unnecessary, only small updates. I have 3 more statements. Marisol says wait. Diane knows more now. Do not call tonight. Call at 3 if you can. Each message taught me the discipline of restraint. I had spent much of my life believing that motherhood meant moving toward the child. Now I was learning that sometimes motherhood means staying exactly where you have been placed until called. On the 15th day after the folder came to my kitchen, Claire sent me a picture of the azaleas. Not current azaleas, a photograph from spring, bright pink blossoms against the front of my house. Azaleas means call. My heart began to pound so hard I had to sit down before dialing. She answered on the second ring. "Hi, Mom," she said brightly. Too brightly. I understood at once that Andrew was nearby. "Hello, sweetheart," I said. "I am sorry to bother you, but I cannot find the number for the plumber, the one your father liked. Do you remember where I put it?" A pause. Then Claire said, "I think it might be in the drawer near the back door." Her voice was steady, but there was breath beneath it. I looked there. Maybe in Dad's workshop. The workshop. She needed to come here. I said, "Would you mind stopping by to help me look? Not tonight if you are busy, but soon." Another pause. "I can come now. Andrew has a call." In the background, faintly, I heard his voice. "What is wrong?" Claire said, away from the phone. "Mom lost something for the house. I will be quick." I could not hear his answer clearly, only the tone, smooth, displeased, contained. She came 27 minutes later. This time she used her key. When she stepped inside, she was pale, and there was a red mark on her wrist. Not a bruise, not yet. Just a mark, as if someone had gripped too tightly, or as if she had pulled away from something. She saw me see it, and immediately tugged her sleeve down. "Claire," I said quietly. "Not now." I nodded. We went to the kitchen. She did not sit. She stood by the table and took a folded sheet of paper from her purse. "He knows about the credit report," she said. The room seemed to narrow. "How?" "I do not know. Maybe mail? Maybe email? Maybe he has access to more than I realized." "What happened?" She swallowed. "He asked why I was checking my credit. I said Diane had mentioned everyone should do it once a year. He said Diane was interfering. He said I was becoming secretive. He said secrecy destroys trust." I watched her carefully. "And the mark?" She looked at her wrist as if surprised to find it attached to the story. "He took my phone." The words entered the room and stayed there. I reached for it. He held my wrist. Not hard. She said it automatically. Not hard. I had heard women say those 2 words before, in different contexts, about different men, always offered quickly, as if the absence of worse violence should reduce the meaning of what had happened. I said, "Hard enough to leave a mark." Her eyes filled, but she did not cry. He gave it back. He apologized. He said I scared him because I was acting unlike myself. Unlike myself. Another phrase that sounded concerned until you heard the accusation. I asked, "What do you need now?" She unfolded the paper. "This is what Marisol told me to prepare if things changed quickly." It was a checklist. Practical. Terrifying in its practicality. Identification documents, medication, independent bank account, change passwords from a safe device, secure sentimental items only if safe, do not announce departure, have transportation, have a place to stay unknown or not easily accessed, notify attorney after leaving, consider credit freeze, document escalation. I read it twice. "Are we there?" I asked. Claire looked toward the window. "I do not know." That was the most honest answer. Not every escalation means immediate departure. Not every warning sign presents a clear timeline. Danger does not always introduce itself with certainty. Sometimes the most frightening place is the threshold between what has been endured and what can no longer be managed. Claire said, "I need to bring more documents here tonight. I need to do it while he is on his call, and I need you to come with me." I felt the room tilt. "To your house?" "Yes." Everything in me wanted to say yes immediately. Everything in me also heard Marisol's careful framework: safety, documentation, do not improvise beyond the plan. "Does Marisol know?" "I called her office before I came. She is in court, but her assistant said if I feel unsafe, I should leave. If I am retrieving documents, I should not go alone if I can avoid it." "Does Andrew know you are here?" "Yes." "Does he know I might come back with you?" "No." I thought of Andrew at church, his smile, his noticing. I thought of the mark on Claire's wrist. I thought of my old tendency to act once emotion finally caught up with truth. Love with discipline. I said, "We will not confront him." "No." "We will not discuss the marriage." "No." "We will get what you need and leave if anything feels wrong." "Yes." I picked up my purse, then stopped. "Wait." I called Ruth. She answered on the first ring as if she had been expecting me. "I am going with Claire to pick up some things," I said. "If I do not call you in 1 hour, call me. If I do not answer, call Diane." Ruth did not ask for explanations. "1 hour," she said. "I have the clock." Then Claire and I drove to her house. I had been there dozens of times, but never like that. The streets seemed too quiet, the houses too composed. Porch lights glowed as if nothing in the world were wrong. Claire drove with both hands on the wheel, her face set in concentration. When we pulled into the driveway, Andrew's car was there. The blue front door looked exactly as it always had. "I want you to stay with me here. This is the part of the story where a life that looks ordinary from the street begins to reveal what has been happening behind the door." If you are still listening, write the word door in the comments. And please, if this story is helping you understand someone in your life, share it. Not with accusation. With care. Leave a like, subscribe, and keep walking with me, because what happened inside that house changed the way I understood my daughter, my son-in-law, and myself. Andrew opened the door before Claire could use her key. That detail mattered. He must have been watching. Or waiting. "Margaret," he said, surprised, but not surprised enough. "Andrew." Claire stepped forward. "Mom is helping me find some papers for her insurance records," she said. It was a good lie. Simple, boring, attached to my age and my house. The kind of lie that asks to be dismissed. Andrew looked from her to me. "Insurance records?" I gave him the expression of a 76-year-old widow mildly overwhelmed by paperwork. It was not difficult. I had been practicing versions of that face in doctors' offices and bank branches for years. "I am trying to get my files in order," I said. "Claire mentioned she might have copies from when she helped me after Walter passed." Andrew smiled. "Of course. Come in." There was no reason for him to refuse. That was the strange safety of the moment. Reputation requires hospitality. Inside, the house smelled of lemon cleaner and roasted vegetables. A lamp glowed beside the sofa. On the coffee table sat a book about coastal architecture, a candle, and Claire's phone. Placed there, not in her pocket, not in her purse. On the coffee table, visible. Andrew saw me notice it. "Claire left that in the living room," he said lightly. "She is always misplacing things lately." There it was again. The public version being constructed in real time. Claire said nothing. I said, "I misplace things constantly. That is why I brought reinforcements." Andrew laughed politely. "Would you like tea?" "No, thank you. We will be quick." He looked at Claire. "Where are these papers?" In the office. I can help. No, Claire said too quickly. The air changed. Andrew's smile remained, but something behind it sharpened. Claire corrected herself. I know where they are. It will only take a minute. Of course, he said. But he followed us to the stairs, not all the way, just to the bottom, watching. The office was on the second floor, overlooking the side yard. I had always liked it because Claire had painted the walls a soft gray-green and placed a drafting table near the window. Now it felt smaller. On one wall were shelves of binders. On the desk sat Andrew's laptop, closed. Claire moved quickly to a file cabinet. Her hands were steady at first, then less so when the drawer stuck. Slowly, I whispered. I know. She removed 3 folders, opened one, scanned the contents, put 2 pages into her purse, then removed a small external drive from behind a stack of printer paper. Is that all? No. She crossed to the bookshelf and took down a binder labeled Home Warranties. Inside, behind plastic sleeves containing appliance manuals, was another envelope. She handed it to me. Put this in your purse. I did. From downstairs, Andrew called, Everything all right? Claire froze. I answered before she could. We found warranties for a dishwasher I do not own, so we are making excellent progress. A beat, then Andrew laughed. It was not a warm laugh. Claire exhaled. We were almost done when I saw something on the desk, a small leather notebook, dark brown. Claire saw me see it and shook her head. Not that. I understood. It might be Andrew's. It might be bait. It might be nothing. But nothing in that house could be treated as neutral. We went downstairs. Andrew was standing near the coffee table, holding Claire's phone, not using it, just holding it. I found it, he said. Claire's face changed almost imperceptibly. Thank you. He did not hand it to her immediately. You should keep better track of it. I could feel my old self rise up, the mother who wanted to step forward and say, give my daughter her phone. But I held still. Claire's eyes flicked toward me once, not pleading, warning. Andrew handed her the phone. Then he looked at me. Margaret, I hope Claire is not worrying you with all this paperwork. She has been under a lot of stress. I think paperwork worries everyone, I said. True, but Claire has a way of absorbing anxiety. I have encouraged her to rest more, not take on unnecessary concerns. He spoke gently, reasonably. If someone had walked into the room at that moment, they would have seen a caring husband and a mother-in-law being reassured. I said, concern is not always unnecessary. His eyes held mine. No, of course not. It was the first honest moment between us, though no honest words had been spoken. Claire said, we should go. So soon? Andrew asked. Mom needs these tonight. I thought it was for insurance records. It is. Then surely tomorrow would be fine. Surely. There it was again, that dangerous word. I said, at my age, Andrew, when I remember something, I try to handle it before I forget it again. He smiled. Of course. Claire moved toward the door. I followed. Andrew followed too. At the threshold, he touched Claire's shoulder. It looked affectionate. It was not. I could see the pressure in his fingers. Drive safely, he said. I will. Text me when you get to your mother's. I am coming back. The silence after that was small, but deep. Andrew looked at her. Are you? Claire did not answer immediately. I think in that pause, all 3 of us understood that the old performance had cracked. Then Claire said, I need to help her sort the files. For how long? I do not know. His hand dropped from her shoulder. I saw the calculation move across his face and vanish almost instantly. Fine, he said. Take the time you need. But fine, like surely, had become a word I no longer trusted. We left. Neither of us spoke until we were in the car with the doors locked and the engine on. Then Claire said, I am not going back tonight. I reached for my seatbelt with hands that suddenly felt very old. "All right." She pulled out of the driveway. In the side mirror, I saw Andrew standing in the open doorway of the blue house, watching us leave. And I knew, with a cold certainty I had not felt before, that the story had entered a new part. Not the ending. Not yet. Only the part where the quiet stopped, protecting him. The next morning, Marisol called before 8. Claire and I were already awake. Neither of us had slept much after the storage unit came back into the story. There are questions that do not wait politely for morning. They sit at the edge of the bed. They follow you into the bathroom. They stand beside the coffee pot. They make every ordinary sound feel like an interruption. Claire had made a list before sunrise. Storage unit receipts. Blue key tag. Possible contents. Whose name is on the rental agreement? Payment source, legal access, financial relevance, safety concerns. She had written those last two words twice. Safety concerns. I noticed that her handwriting was steadier than it had been the first Saturday she came to my kitchen. Not calm exactly, not peaceful, but steadier. There is a difference between a person who is not afraid and a person who has begun to believe fear is not the only authority in the room. Marisol said she had reviewed Claire's message and wanted us to proceed carefully. She would contact the storage facility through legal channels if the charges could be tied to an account in Claire's name. Claire was not to go there alone. She was not to attempt to access the unit without confirmation. She was not to ask Andrew about it. Curiosity is understandable, Marisol said, but curiosity is not the plan. That sentence stayed with me. Because curiosity can become danger when you are dealing with someone who has built a life out of concealment. A person wants answers so badly that they begin to imagine shortcuts. They think, I will just look once. I will just ask one question. I will just drive by. But safety is often protected by refusing the shortcut. Claire wrote that down. Curiosity is not the plan. If you are listening right now, I want you to hold on to that. When someone you love is untangling themselves from control, the goal is not to discover everything in one emotional rush. The goal is to stay safe enough to discover the truth properly. If that line means something to you, write the word steady in the comments. Leave a like if you believe careful truth is stronger than rushed reaction. Share this story with someone who needs to hear that safety comes before answers. And subscribe if you have walked this far with us, because this final part carries the lesson home. By noon, Marisol had confirmed what Claire had feared. The storage unit was connected to a payment source bearing Claire's name, not Andrew's business card, not a shared account Claire knowingly managed. Her name. The facility was located 20 minutes outside Annapolis in a low industrial stretch near a highway, the kind of place most people pass without noticing. Rows of orange doors, security cameras, a small office with a vending machine, and a bulletin board full of faded notices. Ordinary again. So much of this story happened inside ordinary places. Marisol arranged for access with documentation and advised that Claire go with her, not with me alone. I was grateful for that. I wanted to be there. Of course I did. But I had begun to understand that wanting to be present and needing to be present were not the same thing. Claire asked me to come anyway, but only to wait outside. I need you nearby, she said, not inside unless I ask. So I drove behind Marisol's car that afternoon, with Claire in the passenger seat beside me. She wore a navy sweater and had tied her hair back. In her lap, she held a folder and a pen. Not because she needed the pen, because holding a pen made her feel like someone who could record reality instead of being swallowed by it. When we arrived, Marisol met us in the parking lot. She looked at Claire with the kind of seriousness that does not frighten because it does not exaggerate. You decide how much you want to see today, Marisol said. If we open it and you need to stop, we stop. Claire nodded. I want to see. The unit was in the third row, number 317. The lock was not the old silver key lock Claire had imagined. It had been replaced with a combination lock. That fact alone made her face go pale. He changed it, she whispered. Marisol said, or someone did. We do not assign meaning before we have facts. What we know, what we suspect, what we need to verify. The facility manager removed the lock after confirming paperwork. The metal door rolled upward with a grinding sound that made me flinch even from several yards away. I did not go inside. I stood beside my car with my hands clasped tightly in front of me, watching Claire and Marisol step into a room that had existed in my daughter's name without her knowledge. They were inside for 23 minutes. I know because I counted. At first, nothing happened. Then Claire came to the doorway, put one hand against the metal frame, and bent slightly as if she could not get enough air. Marisol stood beside her, speaking quietly. Claire nodded. She did not cry. That somehow frightened me more. When they finally came back to the car, Claire was carrying one cardboard box. If this story has meant something to you, I want to thank you from the bottom of my heart for staying until the end. Thank you for listening to Claire. Thank you for sitting at this kitchen table with me. Thank you for every comment, every shared memory, every quiet moment where you recognized a piece of your own life or someone else's. Before you go, leave a like so this story can reach the person who needs it tonight. Write in the comments where you are listening from and what time it is there. And if one word from this story is staying with you, write that word too. Clarity. Witness. Boundaries. Walking. Now. Whatever it is, leave it there like a small light for the next person who comes along. Share this with someone you love, not because you know their whole story, but because you may not. And subscribe if you want to keep hearing stories that do not rush past the hard parts, stories that honor the quiet courage it takes to tell the truth. My name is Margaret Whitfield. I am 76 years old. I live in a small white house with blue shutters on Bayberry Lane. The azaleas are blooming again. The herbs are still alive on the windowsill. The kitchen table still catches the morning light. And when my daughter comes through the door now, she does not knock like a stranger carrying a secret. She uses her key. She calls my name. And the house answers.